I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Well, Bill, the big news of the day is, of course, Secretary of Defense James Mattis, General Mattis, Mad Dog as they call him in some circles, stepping down as the Secretary of Defense. And it's not just that, though, because administrations change, and typically after elections they do. But, Bill, in this case, General Mattis has written a letter to a very gracious, carefully worded letter that basically said, I disagree with President Trump on the issue of how we deal with our allies, and I disagree with President Trump on the issue of how we deal with our enemies, essentially saying we shouldn't badmouth our allies and we shouldn't cheerlead for Russia and China. Bill, I know you've already heard this breaking news, so your reaction when you first heard it.
When you get to issues like this, it's really important that I be as clear as I can. You know, I try to have a consistent set of principles, and I try to apply those principles as fairly as I can. And I've said many times over the departure, especially over the last couple of months, over the departure of people I wasn't too fond of, that anybody in the cabinet serves at the pleasure of the president. This is certainly still the case. And to the degree that I believe that the president should have the Secretary of Defense that he wants and thinks is appropriate, then this is an appropriate outcome for the situation, at least in terms of constitutionality and so on. And so let me say this. This is the biggest disappointment of the Trump administration for me. I've seen a lot of people say Mattis wanted to stay in Syria, Mattis wanted to do this and that. I looked at it, I read the letter very carefully. I thought it was extremely reasonable. And we live in an age now, Scott, that is so tripwire confrontational that for me to say something like I agree with General Mattis's position in his letter, so many people hear that as saying I think Donald Trump needs to be impeached and therefore, you know, just go off on this. The president is the president. So let me start off by my first thought was disappointment. My second thought, which followed right away, was that we had Jim Mattis as Secretary of Defense for 2 years. And during those 2 years, he strengthened the military enormously. I know personally from a number of people that he had an incredible increase in morale. And so when I'm left with the disappointment of this, I come back to the idea that, well, in November of 2016, we had two choices. And the choice we made allowed the Defense Department to be significantly buttressed, I think. And if Hillary Clinton had been elected, it would have been further degraded and in an attempt to destroy the military. When I say destroy the military, by the way, I'm not so naive as to say go out and sink the battleships, or the aircraft carriers, rather, because that's not how you would do it. But I do know that during the 8 years of the Obama administration, the kind of people who rose in the command structure were things like commanders of an Air Force base. I heard this story first person anecdotally. That said that there was a general commanding an Air Force base, and while his actual operational readiness was very low, he was bragging to everybody that he had the greenest base in the entire U.S. military. That's how. I'm not joking, though. I'd love to tell you I was joking, but I'm not. That's how you destroy the military, by having special forces guys be forced to inspect their troops to see if there's any tattoos that, you know, transgender people might find offensive, which is not an exaggeration either. That actually happens. So,
what do you think, Bill, it says about the character of General Mattis? It's always hard to tell with resignations whether somebody quit or was quitted. Because you read the letter,
yeah.
And basically General Mattis said what you said. The president has the right to have a Secretary of Defense who agrees with his views on these major issues involving defense. What does it say about the character of Mattis? Not only that he would resign when that disagreement comes along in order to give the president that prerogative, but also the way he did it.
When I read Mattis's letter, my immediate response was, this is almost to the word exactly what I had prayed to hear from high-ranking officials in the military during the Obama administration. Because this struck me as a declaration of principle, and frankly, no matter what you may say about Mattis agreeing with the president and so on, I think that letter really needs to be enshrined someplace, because to me, that letter was a perfect declaration of how these things should operate when there's a difference of opinion between a military man and his commanding officer. He didn't go to the press. He didn't write a book. He didn't start chatting to reporters. He didn't start leaking all this information. And at the same time, he didn't go along with a policy that he fundamentally disagrees with. I thought the letter was exceedingly eloquent. And to get to the nub of my disappointment, I personally think that the points that General Mattis made are absolutely legitimate, and I always considered him to be an honorable man. He was. I was saying, look, it was worth Donald Trump just to get Mattis, and we had him for 2 years, and that's not, it's a relative. Obama had 3 secretaries of defense in a 2-year period or something like that, I think. So I'm very, very sorry to see him go, and the reason I'm sorry to see him go, among many other reasons, is that I perceive that General Mattis has a profoundly good grasp of military operations, and I don't mean either tactical or even strategic operations. I think he has a very superb, excellent grasp of the role of the U.S. military as it applies to our defense obligations, as it ties into state obligations. I know everybody's saying, well, states filled with traitors, and I certainly think there was a good case to be made for that with the last 2 secretaries of state. But nevertheless, there is in fact a diplomatic arm to the United States, and those are Trump appointees now. And
if I remember correctly, in his letter, in reference to the importance of strong alliances buttressed by the chief executive or commander-in-chief, as well as our military, he actually did, while saying that he believed in strong alliances, he mentioned the United States as being the indispensable nation.
Well, it is the indispensable nation, and the United States military has been strengthened enormously under Mattis, which I have to make very clear really means, without hyperbole or any kind of mental gymnastics, really means that the military was greatly strengthened under President Donald Trump's administration. I have just a real personal disappointment about this one. I had a personal disappointment about Nikki Haley. I was, in a general way, disappointed when he fired the chief of staff. Was it Flynn, General Flynn?
Yes.
Yeah.
Michael Flynn.
And so I support the president. I support the president's ability to make whatever decisions he likes. I support his ability to make the foreign policy decisions that he thinks are appropriate. And I think Donald Trump's done a lot of good for this country. I also have to tell you that I thought that the tone of General Mattis's letter and the points that he raised were legitimate ones, and I was more disappointed about this than anything that has happened in the Trump administration so far. And when people like Nikki Haley and General Flynn and General Mattis and a number of others who I cared not so much for resign, it does it causes me concern, and I don't know how else to put it. Now, again, I've been reading the comments and I've seen the reactions to all of this, and I know that, as I said, we live in an age where I say something like this causes me concern, and people hear, "Oh, you're abandoning the president in his hour of need." I'm not doing that at all. But I'd also be lying to you if I told you that I think that this was a good thing, or that if I thought that General Mattis's points of resignation were frivolous or superfluous, I certainly would have said that too.
So going forward, this is obviously an indicator, one way or the other, of what people think of the President of the United States. We're already mounting the 2020 presidential campaign. In effect, that's almost in full swing. We have a president who promised to build a wall, and as of we're recording this today when the final budget negotiations are still going on, so it doesn't look like the Senate's going to say okay to $5 billion for the wall. But as of this moment, we don't have a wall. We still have Obamacare. Hillary Clinton is walking around free, not even with an ankle bracelet. But we do have a 3.4% GDP growth. Do you think that's enough to both fend off a primary challenge to the president from within the Republican Party, Bill, but also to carry him to victory in 2020?
I don't have an opinion on his primary chances. I've heard anecdotally over the last several hours from a number of my friends in the military that they're very disappointed about this. And it's been a bad couple weeks for the president. But these things come and go. We have high weeks and low weeks, and sometimes just random factors operate in such a way so that you have a string of things that look very bad, and other times you have a string of things that look very good. But let me answer your question directly. 2 years of economic growth under Donald Trump means that millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of Americans and their families and everybody that they're connected to, including the people that they buy furniture from and all the rest of it, have an improved standard of living, and they have more hope for the future, and they have more confidence and more belief in the future of this country. And that's attributable to Donald Trump. There's nobody else attributable to that. That's not General Mattis's department. Trump did that on his own. We also have two conservative Supreme Court judges, or at the very, very least, for those people who might have been disappointed with the last ruling, we don't have two more liberal judges on the justices on the Supreme Court. And I suspect we're going to get some more too. Those two things alone would be enough to make the case for Donald Trump. But even if you want to put all of those gains aside, and the gains that General Mattis made while he was Secretary of Defense, even if you put all of that aside and just assume that the election of Donald Trump simply froze everything at Obama 2016, just for the sake of the argument, okay? Just assume that none of these good things happened, that when Trump became president, everything maintained exactly the same way it was under President Obama. That alone would have been an enormous improvement over Hillary Clinton and the corruption and the sense of infallibility and the rot at the center of the Justice Department and at the head of the FBI. All of these things not only would have maintained themselves, but it would have gotten much, much worse. So I look at Donald Trump's presidency as the American people responding to what they saw as many, many different threats in terms of lawlessness, in terms of the weakening of the Defense Department, in terms of a general pessimism and an apology for America and what it represents. And the election of Donald Trump in itself alone, put Mattis aside, put the economic growth aside, put the justices aside, just having a president who believes in his country, to me, after the last 8 years, is worth any price. Just forget all of the operational successes that he's had. He's had a number, and he's going to have some more. Just the simple fact that we have a president who's talking about making America great again, and who's not ashamed of the country, and who takes real pride in America and putting America and Americans first. That alone is worth any one of these losses. And the reason that losses like Nikki Haley and General Flynn and now General Mattis are so disappointing to me is because they are quality people. I don't think there's any much discussion about that. And I hate to lose quality people, but when you're all said and done, Scotty, you're upset about losing quality people because those quality people were appointed in the first place, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So, I don't know if there's maybe we'll get a Matter Dog Malarkey or whoever we get next. We don't know who the next Secretary of Defense is going to be. My hope it'll be somebody I'll just come out and say what flew into my mind. Somebody as intimidating as General Mattis. During the entire Obama administration, I was saying the role of the Defense Department should be that of a snarling, angry wolf that is just straining at the leash, just straining. And he just wants to basically start a war with everybody in the world. I think that's what the Defense Department, under the cover of a certain amount of civility and professionalism, obviously, but that should be the impression that it gives. If you have a Defense Department secretary like that makes things much easier for the president and also for the Secretary of State, because now they can both say, look, I'm trying to work with you here, Kim, but Mattis, he's ready to launch, man. I mean, he's ready to go. So I got to have something, or else. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's good cop, bad cop, and then if you have a good cop Secretary of State and a bad cop Defense Secretary, then the president can play these two things and tune it into whoever he's dealing with in whatever particular subject. So I hope that the next Secretary of Defense is as intimidating as General Mattis was. Because the thing I like most about Mattis, by far, was an outlook on deterrence that as I'm an enormous student of history. I'm an amateur student of history, but I read a lot of military history, and I thought that Jim Mattis perfectly fit the role of the Secretary of Defense in terms of his attitude, which is, as in his famous order, be professional, be polite, and have a plan to kill everybody you meet. And without hyperbole or flippancy or anything, I actually think that is precisely the attitude that the Secretary of Defense should have all the time.
Well, Secretary Mattis has graciously agreed to stay on until February 28th, 2019, in order to smooth the transition with his successor and give plenty of time between that and the appointment of a new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in September of 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, we actually plan to stay on a lot longer than that. But sort of like Secretary Mattis, who serves at the pleasure of the president, we serve at the pleasure of the members at BillWhittle.com. And we are grateful for their support. Many of you have gone to BillWhittle.com and clicked that Become a Member link and joined up. Some of you are contributing $9.95 a month. Some of you are contributing $49 a month to become a producing member. You can do all of that if you go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. We're grateful for those folks. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.